It was a typical Friday night broadcast, one of those political panels where elected officials and pundits trade sound bites over coffee and studio lights. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was seated at the far end of the curved table, composed but sharp and clearly ready for whatever was coming. The host turned to her mid-segment, trying to steer the conversation toward the ultra-familiar narrative of family values and personal integrity in politics. That's when everything shifted. Crockett didn't hesitate. She leaned forward just slightly, enough to signal that she wasn't going to give the usual polished response. "You know," she began, her tone calm, even amused. "I've listened to a lot of talk about values lately, about marriage, loyalty, and tradition, and I just have to ask how much of that is for the cameras." The room didn't quite freeze, but there was a tension in the air. She continued, "We hear some folks go on and on about how they're going to restore traditional American families, how they're champions of morality. But let's talk real. When someone spends more time at rallies than with their own wife, you start to wonder what kind of family values they're selling." The panelists shifted in their chairs, unsure whether to interject. But she had the floor now. It's not just the public schedule," Crockett said. "You start noticing the absence, the silence. When's the last time we saw a genuine moment between him and his wife, one that wasn't curated for a camera? It's not just about photo ops at some red carpet event or holiday function. I'm talking about real support, real presence." Then came the twist, subtle but cutting. "I had a conversation not too long ago," she said, pausing just enough to make people lean in, "with someone who used to work in one of those Florida residences, and let's just say, things haven't been as picture perfect as people are being told. I was told she hasn't stayed there in months, that they keep separate quarters, separate schedules. Some days, they don't even speak." There was no dramatic music, no raised voice. Crockett delivered the information like she was talking about tax reform. That was the unsettling part. It wasn't performative. It was observational, almost casual. "Now, don't get me wrong," she clarified, "personal lives are personal. But when someone wraps their entire campaign in Christian family values and calls out others for not meeting their moral standards, then yes, it's fair game to ask, are you even living the values you preach?" The panel moderator attempted to pivot, sensing the clip was already making its way to social media. But Crockett wasn't finished. "I'm not here to throw stones. But if you're gonna hold the American public to a standard, if you're gonna talk about how broken families are ruining the country, then let's be honest about your own house. You can't be leading rallies about unity and tradition when your own marriage looks like a business contract." The comment landed like a quiet thunderclap. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic walk-offs, just that steady stream of truth disguised as commentary, and she never even said his name. She didn't have to. The implications were crystal clear. The figure she referred to was synonymous with a brand one built on bravado, legacy, and control, but Crockett pierced that image with something more potent than any political rebuttal: personal reality. By sharing a subtle anecdotal truth about his domestic life, something that contradicted the image so carefully crafted, she opened the door to a larger, more uncomfortable conversation, one that didn't rely on partisan attacks, but on simple observation, and for viewers, it was impossible to unhear. People didn't need headlines to tell them what was going on. They just needed someone willing to point it out with clarity, and that night, Jasmine Crockett did exactly that. At Mar-a-Lago, the atmosphere was deceptively calm. Palm trees swayed gently outside, guests milled about in the lobby, and the scent of polished wood and cigars lingered in the air. But upstairs, behind a pair of closed double doors, the mood was anything but relaxed. Donald Trump sat in a high-backed leather chair, staring at the television in disbelief as the rerun of Jasmine Crockett's interview looped on the screen. He had been watching cable news casually that evening, expecting the usual back-and-forth banter, some light jabs, maybe even a favorable mention or two. But what he saw instead froze him mid-sip of his Diet Coke. There she was, Crockett, cool as ever, casually dropping details about his personal life with surgical precision, and not in a dramatic, ranting way. She wasn't loud. She wasn't angry. She was worse measured.com and factual. She hasn't stayed at Mar-a-Lago in months. That sentence echoed in the room. He slammed the can on the desk hard enough that his aide flinched. "Turn that off," he barked. The aide fumbled for the remote, but the damage was done. Trump's face was flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and ran a hand through his hair. "Who told her that? Who's talking? I want names now." Nobody in the room answered immediately. One of his senior advisors tried to deflect. Double quotes, "Sir. It's just media. Noise, the usual attacks. It won't last more than a day." Trump looked up sharply. "This isn't media noise. She said things no one's ever said on live TV. She talked about Melania, our marriage. That's not an attack, that's a move. And she did it smooth too. Didn't even need to name me. Everyone watching knew exactly who she meant. His tone had shifted from outrage to something colder, more calculating. He knew Crockett hadn't just insulted him. She had disrupted the narrative he'd spent years crafting. The strong, composed leader with the elegant first lady by his side. The man who rebuilt a brand on luxury, loyalty, and power. That image had been quietly punctured on primetime television by someone who refused to play the usual political game. She's smart, he muttered, almost to himself. She doesn't shout like the others. That's why it works. It sounds real. He turned to his communications director. Call Hannity tonight. I don't care what segment we interrupt. I want a slot. We're responding to this now. But, sir, the aide replied cautiously, addressing it might make it bigger than it is. Too late. It's already big. People are asking questions. They're wondering where Melania is. You think I don't see the tweets? The gossip sites? This isn't about her. This is about control. They're making it look like I don't even have my own house in order. He stood up, pacing behind the desk. I built my campaign on strength, stability. People believe I don't break. But if they think my marriage is falling apart, that undermines everything. That's what she's doing, chipping away at the foundation, one quote at a time. His legal advisor finally spoke up. Do you want to release a statement from the First Lady's office? Trump stopped pacing. No, that'll make it look worse. If Melania says something now, it'll seem like we're scrambling, but we need something. A photo, an event, anything with her in it, even if it's from earlier this year. The team exchanged nervous glances. Everyone knew that Melania's appearances had become rare and increasingly difficult to coordinate. She had grown more private than ever, retreating behind carefully managed appearances. She had quietly withdrawn from the spotlight and from him. Trump noticed the hesitation. His jaw clenched. Get something. Anything. I'm not going to let some freshman congresswoman control the story. His phone buzzed again, another notification. Another repost of the clip. The phrase separate quarters was trending. It wasn't just political junkies paying attention anymore. It had crossed into pop culture territory at late night shows, morning talk segments, Instagram reels. He picked up the phone and scrolled through the mentions. A familiar feeling stirred in his chest, not defeat, not quite, but the sting of being outmaneuvered, even temporarily, and by someone he hadn't taken seriously. That would change. The moment Jasmine Crockett's comments aired, the media wheels started turning fast. Newsrooms across the country buzzed as editors scrambled to verify the subtle bombshell she had just dropped. It wasn't every day that a sitting member of Congress made pointed implications about a former president's marriage on live television, especially without any dramatic flair or accusatory tone. That calm delivery made it hit harder, and the media smelled something real. By the next morning, clips of the interview had gone viral across multiple platforms. But what made it explode wasn't just the remarks themselves, it was what happened. Afterward, within 24 hours, multiple media outlets began receiving calls and messages from anonymous sources, former staffers, and insiders who claimed they had more to share. The floodgates had opened. One of the first outlets to publish was the Daily Beast. In an early Saturday piece, they quoted an unnamed Mar-a-Lago employee who said, "People on the inside have known for months that Melania and Mr. Trump live mostly separate lives. She has her own space, her own routine. They might appear together for big events, but that's about it." That one line, "live mostly separate lives," echoed across the media landscape. CNN followed suit, digging into the claims with their own sources. A segment ran that evening where a former White House aide confirmed that Melania had been spending extended time at her own residence in Maryland, and that she had not participated in any strategic meetings or campaign planning sessions. The host looked into the camera after reading the quote and said plainly, "This lines up with what Congresswoman Crockett said. It raises serious questions about the image Donald Trump has spent years maintaining." Fox News, typically defensive of Trump, took a more cautious approach. But even they couldn't ignore the traction the story had gained. Their media panel framed it as a coordinated narrative push and questioned the motives behind the leak. Still, they didn't deny the facts. One contributor reluctantly admitted, "If this were any other public figure, we'd be asking why the spouse is absent from major campaign events." By Sunday, it wasn't just politics anymore. Morning talk shows ran with it. TMZ and Page 6 published pieces questioning whether there had been a quiet separation. Social media influencers and podcast hosts dissected Crockett's remarks like it was a mystery novel. The story had legs, and no one could pull it back. Trump, of course, was watching all of this unfold, and every new headline seemed to push him closer to fury. His Truth Social posts became increasingly aggressive, accusing the radical media of spreading lies and calling Crockett a disgrace to the office. But the more he raged, the more the media leaned in. That's when things escalated again. Late Sunday night, Politico released an article citing to former Trump campaign staffers who claimed there was an internal conversation months ago about how to handle Melania's prolonged absence. One source said, "We were told not to bring her up. No questions, no strategy around her image. It was like she didn't exist." Asterisk, that quote hit the headlines like a firecracker. Like she didn't exist became a trending phrase. Shorthand for the quiet unraveling happening behind the scenes. It no longer felt like gossip, it felt documented, structured, verified. Asterisk, the impact was immediate. Voters started talking, not just Trump's critics, but even his supporters. On conservative forums, some began asking why Melania had remained invisible for so long. A few asked if this was why she hadn't joined him at rallies or stood beside him during key campaign announcements. Others wondered if the separation had affected his decision-making behind closed doors. Asterisk, what Crockett had done or not was expose a vulnerability no one had dared to address directly before. She hadn't shouted it or turned it into a political attack ad. She had simply placed it on the table, like a card everyone pretended wasn't in the deck. Once it was out there, others began laying down their own cards too, and the picture they painted wasn't flattering. Asterisk, reporters tried to get a comment from Melania's office. No response. She stayed quiet, which only made the headlines louder. The silence wasn't just heard, it was interpreted. As the media storm raged on, and commentators continued dissecting Jasmine Crockett's remarks, there was one voice conspicuously absent: Melania Trump's. The former First Lady, known for her tightly controlled public image and careful avoidance of controversy, said nothing. No public statements, no interviews, not even a brief acknowledgement on social media. And her silence, in that moment, spoke louder than any denial ever could. Asterisk, people started to notice. At first, it was casual observers on social media asking why Melania hadn't responded to the implications that she and Donald Trump were living largely separate lives. Then came the morning show hosts and weekend pundits, raising the question aloud, where was Melania? If what Crockett said wasn't true, why not clarify it? Asterisk, the truth was, Melania hadn't appeared at any major campaign event in months. She wasn't on stage at the announcement rally. She didn't join Trump during key moments of his primary campaign. Even when he appeared at high-profile fundraisers, she remained absent. No wave, no photograph, no presence at all. And now that Crockett had pointed it out, everyone else saw it clearly. Asterisk, the Trump campaign attempted to do some damage control. They quietly released an old photo of Melania standing next to her husband at a dinner event, smiling and poised, but it didn't work. Online sleuths quickly noticed the timestamp. It was taken nearly a year earlier. That only deepened the suspicion. If everything was fine, why not simply have Melania appear with him now? Why pull from the archives? Asterisk, the lack of a current appearance didn't just raise eyebrows, it stirred speculation that went beyond politics. Was there an internal agreement to keep her out of the spotlight? Had she decided to distance herself from the campaign altogether? And most significantly, was her silence intentional? Asterisk, insiders close to the Trump circle began leaking information to the press, adding new layers to the unfolding narrative. One source told Vanity Fair that Melania was extremely aware of what Crockett had said, and had chosen not to respond. She doesn't want to engage in that kind of back and forth, the source said. But more than that, she doesn't want to be used as a prop. She's made her boundaries clear. Asterisk, that line, she doesn't want to be used as a prop, quickly took on a life of its own. Commentators debated whether it was a subtle admission of friction within the marriage, or simply Melania exercising her autonomy. Either way, it aligned with the image that Crockett had carefully outlined. A woman removed from the campaign trail, not out of shyness, but by choice. Asterisk, even Trump loyalists couldn't fully explain her absence. Some tried, pointing to her desire for privacy or the protective bubble she had always maintained around her personal life, but others struggled. After all, this was a campaign built on optics. Trump understood the power of an image. He knew that standing on stage with Melania and projected unity, elegance, and traditional values. Her absence wasn't just a missing figure, it was a message, and people were reading it. Asterisk, behind closed doors, Trump reportedly fumed at the lack of support. According to a leaked email from a staffer, there were repeated efforts to encourage Melania to appear publicly, even if just briefly, to quiet the media speculation. But each time, the response was the same: not now. That answer sent a clear signal not just to Trump's team, but to the public, and the public was watching. Online forums filled with speculation. Some believed Melania was waiting for the campaign to pass. Others suggested she was negotiating terms, both personally and financially, before re-emerging. A few argued she might not appear at all. Asterisk, whatever the truth, one fact remained undeniable. Her silence had become its own narrative. It confirmed, for many, what Crockett had so deftly implied, that behind the polished campaign speeches and American flags, something deeper was unraveling. Asterisk, the woman who once stood beside Donald Trump with quiet elegance and unwavering poise, was now nowhere to be seen. And in her absence, she had unwittingly validated the one question Donald Trump didn't want voters asking. If everything was fine, why won't she say so? In the world of politics, image is everything. Campaigns are carefully staged, every handshake, every smile, every flag in the background calculated to send a message. And for Donald Trump, that message has always been rooted in power, dominance, and control of the narrative of his brand. And most importantly, of public perception. But JasmineCrockett's.com, carefully worded remarks, pulled back the curtain in a way few have dared. And once she did, everything that followed took on a new light. Asterisk, she didn't shout, she didn't accuse, she didn't even mention his name, but what she said struck a nerve, not because it was inflammatory, but because it was plausible. It connected with something many Americans had quietly wondered about, but hadn't seen addressed so directly. The glaring absence of Melania and Trump. Asterisk, the silence that followed both from Melania and from Trump's campaign didn't settle the matter. It deepened it. For every attempt to pivot or deflect, another unanswered question emerged. Why hadn't she joined him on stage? Why hadn't she spoken out, even to defend her husband? And why, when the story began to spiral, did no one from their inner circle offer a clear, real-time denial? Asterisk, in politics, timing matters as much as truth. And in this case, silence came at the worst possible moment. Crockett's remarks didn't just raise questions about Trump's marriage, they cast doubt on the authenticity of the values he so frequently invokes. How could a man sell himself as the champion of family, loyalty, and tradition while seemingly detached from his own spouse? Asterisk, Melania's decision to stay quiet, whether out of principle, discomfort, or personal preference, ended up confirming more than any statement ever could. She didn't rush to the podium to defend her husband. She didn't offer a social media post. She remained invisible, and that invisibility became its own answer. Asterisk, meanwhile, the media frenzy only magnified the problem. What started as a single moment on a TV panel ballooned into a national conversation, pulling back the veil on a personal relationship that Trump had long tried to present as stable and unshakable. Crockett didn't start the fire, but she exposed the smoke. Asterisk, in the end, the moment was about more than marriage. It was about the disconnect between image and reality. It showed how even the most powerful figures can be rattled, not by scandals or lawsuits, but by a simple truth delivered plainly. You can't claim to lead the nation's families if your own house isn't in order. Asterisk, and in that truth, a quiet shift occurred, one that no prepared